Welcome to Sip with Summers, the podcast where we talk about sex, intimacy, and pleasure. Because someone has to, and let's be honest, it may as well be me. I'm your host, Jennifer Marie Summers, board certified sexologist, certified sex coach, menopause coach, and your favorite inappropriate friend with a microphone. Around here, we cover everything from why is my libido ghosting me to is it normal to fantasize about pizza during sex? Spoiler alert, yes. So grab a drink and let's get into the good stuff because pleasure is your birthright and awkward is my love language. Let's spill, sip, and say the things most people whisper. Welcome to the show.
So excited for this conversation today because I think attachment theory explains so many things that people experience when they're dating, in relationships, and with sex. And then, of course, you add midlife into the mix when hormones and stress begin exposing every single unresolved issue. Nothing humbles anybody faster than dating, menopause, and a nervous system that's dysregulated. So, welcome back to the show where we normalize conversation that most people are still whispering about. Today, we're going to be talking about attachment styles, intimacy, emotional safety, relationships, sex, and how all of that gets amplified during perimenopause and menopause. Because honestly, the bedroom becomes very revealing when your nervous system is overwhelmed. I am super excited for today's guest, Bev Middleman. She is a certified relationship and attachment trauma practitioner and a certified menopause specialist. Bev helps people heal toxic relationship patterns, improve communication, and better understand how attachment trauma impacts love, intimacy, and emotional regulation.
Thank you. What a beautiful intro.
So, Bev, I'd love to dive into this. For someone listening who maybe only knows attachment styles from Instagram Reels, what
Mm,
are attachment styles actually?
Okay, great place to start. So, your attachment style is essentially the way in which you form an emotional bond with someone else. Okay. So, we often talk about the different styles. There's actually 4 different styles. These are learned behaviors. So, I want to be really clear with your audience. We're not talking about mental illness, we're not talking
Mhm.
about personality disorders. These are behaviors that were etched into your mind very early on, dependent on the interaction that you had with those that were closest to you. Normally, your mother, your father, or a grandmother, like your caregiver at that time, right? So, if we take a step back, we have 2 broad categories. People usually talk about 4 styles. There's 2 broad categories. There are people who are securely attached and people who are insecurely attached.
Okay.
These are individuals who received, for the most part, fair amount of healthy emotional attunement from their caregiver. Now, it's never about perfection, but what the child really needs in order to develop an emotional, healthy capacity is they need that consistency, predictability, sense of safety. So when a child receives that most of the time, they grow up into an adult that has a really good set of skills that positions them well for the world. First of all, they generally have a healthier self esteem. Okay. They also have relational skills. So they can identify their own emotions, they can communicate them. They're good with things like boundaries. They have healthier coping mechanisms when it comes to conflict. So, all of these things that are really helpful when you get into adulthood and you're in a workplace, you have family relations, you're in a romantic relationship, right? So all these things are really helpful. Now, attachment styles are usually talked about just in a romantic context. They're not. They actually, your attachment style impacts from A to Z your behavior, your thought patterns, and all of that with yourself and everyone that you're interacting with.
That's interesting. I've always thought of attachment styles in the relationship context, but I never considered, Bev, that you can have those show up in every area of your life, work, friends, probably
Oh,
even with
yeah.
yourself.
The reason that it gets talked about so often in the context of romantic relationships is because that dynamic, when you're in a partnership, a long term partnership, that dynamic generally will mirror most closely the relationship that you once had with your caregiver. It's the
Mm.
person that you're affording the most amount of trust to, right? You're most intimate with, the person you go to for comfort. So there's a lot of parallels there. So attachment styles, especially if there's trauma in that area, gets triggered more in the romantic sense. But if you pay attention, you'll see these behaviors fall out when you're dealing with other family members, friends, even colleagues.
Now, what about, so we know about the secure. What about the
Yes.
insecure? Because I feel like more people are probably in the insecure side than the secure side.
Yeah, so statistics are hard to sort of nail down, but in North America, they typically, statistics are running at about 50% of the population is secure and 50% is insecure. I tend to think it's more a 40-60 split, where like 40% are secure and 60% are insecure. But because it's self-reported social science, right? It's hard to nail down exactly. So let's talk about what insecure actually means. When you have an insecure attachment, essentially you did not receive that emotional attunement that you needed for healthy development, right? And so a child will generally go in one of two ways. They'll either develop an anxious attachment or they'll develop an avoidant attachment. And these are maladaptations that they develop early on to try to survive their home of origin, the situation that they're in. These patterns, they get etched into our subconscious really early and they follow us into adulthood. And because it's in our subconscious mind, people are unaware of it. It's not in our conscious mind, right? Our conscious awareness. So they're unaware that their patterns are just repeats of things that they've been doing for years and years and years on a sort of survival mode. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. But it's interesting because once I began to understand the different attachment styles, I was able to see how I was showing up in an anxious way in my relationships, both romantic and platonic. So, do you think that sometimes people mistake emotional chaos for intimacy? Because, and the reason I ask that is because I realized when I was like, oh shit, I am anxiously attached. I would think that the chaos was like intimacy, but I realized no, it's just chaos and it's this anxious way I'm trying to connect with someone.
So, what's so interesting about our subconscious mind is that we are always, even if we know better, we're always drawn to what's familiar. So, if we grew up in chaos, that's what we know. So, that's what we know love to be. So, we will be drawn to that, right? So, those butterflies that we feel, and Disney did us no favors by talking about butterflies. That's nervous system actually. That's a sign of dysregulation. That's your body's telling you, I don't feel safe in this situation or in this moment or with this person. But we've romanticized it to mean intimacy or love, or it's more a state of limerence, which
Yes.
is like a state of obsession. But I wanna back up for a moment and talk about anxious attachment and avoidant attachment. They come from similar places, but a little bit different. So the child that grows up in a home where they didn't receive predictable love or predictable emotional attunement, they would have developed an anxious attachment. They would have learned early on that the way to get the attention of their parents or love is through earning. They would have become mother's little helper. At school, they would have become the teacher's pet. And children will naturally do this because the desire to hold on to that connection is so important for a child. In fact, when we're young, like 0 to 5, our survival is dependent on that connection. Literally, we cannot survive. And so the child finds ways, to stay in the good graces, to earn the love of the parent, right? Now, this is always because either there's a fear of, or there has been a true situation of abandonment, right? So the core wound of the anxious, preoccupied person is, I will be abandoned, right? If I am not, my most pleasant, congenial self, and I show people my true breadth of who I am, my authenticity, they will leave me. And so I'll hide that and I'll just be as pleasant as possible. There is no easier way in life than to make people like you than to just say yes to everything.
Yes.
Right. And so this behavior, this pattern becomes really destructive as you get older. So think of the friend who is always there for you, middle of the night, you need a ride to the airport. No problem. I'll come pick you up. They're always there when you have a crisis. And of course, as we're going to get into it, I think a little bit later, these patterns show up strongest in a romantic context and in the bedroom. So when your focus is always on pleasing someone else to the detriment of getting to know yourself, understanding your needs, communicating your needs, but just focusing on pleasing someone else to stave off that I will be abandoned, you could already get a sense of what might be transpiring as a dynamic in the bedroom.
Yes.
I see you shaking your head. You're going, I see where this is going.
Yeah, my inner child is feeling very called out right now. We've been doing work here, Beth.
I'm sorry. You know what, Jennifer? This work can be very confronting.
Yes.
When I first discovered it years ago, I just remember crying and just going like, how did I not know? How did I not know? So it can be very confronting. And this is a very common response.
Yes. Okay. So we got the anxious part down. So tell me
Yes.
more about the avoidant attachment now.
The avoidant. Okay. So they'll either become anxious or they'll become avoidant. Usually we see people who become more avoidant in the scenario whereby there is childhood neglect. So the parent is there, but emotionally, tuned out. Maybe there's too many children in the home. Maybe the home is very stoic, right? There's no I love yous. There's no hugging. The child generally spends a lot of time alone. Maybe there's a lot of judgment, harsh criticism. I can never do right by my parents. The child learns that the parent is not a source of comfort, right? And so they become hyper independent. They develop an attitude of it's me, myself, and I've got to carry myself through life. There's no one's going to save me. And so they develop a whole set of maladaptations to protect themselves. Essentially, they start to suppress their emotions. What we say about avoidance is they underfeel. And anxious people, anxious attachers, tend to overfeel. So the fourth category is actually a melange. It's a mix. It's called the fearful avoidant, sometimes also called the disorganized attacher. And this person generally grows up in a home where there is extreme amounts of chaos, instability, a lot of conflict, and or abuse, any kind of abuse. And what happens is that the child becomes disorganized in their psyche in terms of how to feel about their caregiver. In the scenario by which the child wants to maintain the connection and will generally run towards a parent for comfort and support, but parent is also harming the child. The child becomes very confused because they want to move towards you, but they're also afraid, and so they move back. And so we see this, especially as they get older, this pattern of oscillation. They come close, they get scared, they're sort of known romantically as the hot and the cold partner.
Okay.
And this is because their patterning tells them that, yes, I want to feel love, but if I get too close, I'm going to get harmed. And the fearful avoidant, depending on who they're interfacing with, can oscillate. So if a fearful avoidant, for example, is dating someone who is more dismissive avoidant, their anxious side comes out. They can become the active pursuer.
Mm.
If they're dating someone who is anxiously attached, they tend to become much more avoidant. It's the smallest category. It's about 10% of the population. They have the biggest, I would say, the biggest number of core wounds and deepest wounds. And it's the harder category to understand, especially if you live it, right? So I
Mhm.
myself grew up as a fearful avoidant, and it was very confronting when I started to look at this work.
Oh gosh, yeah. I imagine,
Yeah.
but I also think of how you're able to help so many people because of that, Bev, because of those experiences and the deeper understanding of what it is outside of just the general anxious or avoidant. So I love that
Yeah.
you've explained this to us. So we have secure, we have anxious, we have avoidant, and then we have the fearful avoidant. So how do those attachment styles actually show up in the bedroom?
Excellent questions. I've touched on some of the themes already, but we'll
Yes.
dive in a little bit here. And I have some notes, so I'll be looking down a little bit at times. The anxious person generally is looking at sex. Let me start off by saying that sex, as you know, means a whole lot of different things to different people. So, generally, someone who is anxiously attached, they will see sex as a wonderful opportunity to emotionally bond. What
Mhm.
they are looking for is emotional closeness, right? Someone who's anxiously attached needs a lot of attention, validation, reassurance,
Yes.
and emotional closeness. That's what calms their nervous system. Now, it's not going to surprise you to hear that the avoidant person needs the opposite. The avoidant person is actually triggered by too much emotional closeness because it scares them,
Mm.
right? They're fearful of too much vulnerability or intimacy. So for them, sex is not about the emotional. Sex for them is almost always exclusively physical. It's about the release. You got two partners that come together, like two people could go see a movie together and walk out with completely different perceptions of what they just saw.
That
Right.
happened to me in real life. Yep.
And we see
Mhm.
this happen in sex too, is that two partners come together and, for example, it's really intense, really good sex. And, the anxious partner thinks, oh my God, I'm so in love. And this is just what a wonderful experience. And the avoidant partner is like, it's pretty good. Let's get a cheeseburger.
Yeah,
Right? Like
you're right.
different perspective. Like, let's do that again. That was fine, right? Now,
Mhm.
and the other thing about TikTok Reels and Instagram is that we often present attachment styles as being gendered, but they are
Mhm.
not. Which means that we have just as many men and women who are on the anxious scale, just as many women who are avoidant. We tend to say that the men are avoidant and the women are anxious, and it's just not true. It's not gendered.
Thank you for saying that because we all know we're living in a patriarchal society. And the moment I heard about attachment styles, I was always hearing, yes, the men are avoidant, the women are anxious. And as someone who is a formerly anxious attacher, I would always end up dating avoidant attachment men. It was like
Of
my
course.
toxic trait. So
Yeah.
yes, I appreciate knowing that it's not a gender thing, it's just a thing that people are experiencing. I did want to ask you, with anxiously attached people, do you find that they go into sex looking for that emotional connection, and then maybe the avoidance are more focused on the physical and don't want the emotional, or is something else going on there?
Thing that we do as humans is to try and meet our needs. And in this
Mhm.
case is a lot of times what we're doing is we're trying to meet our needs for emotional regulation. right? To make ourselves feel good, to make ourselves feel calm, right? To release some of those hormones that make us feel good, like oxytocin and whatnot. But what these two people need, the anxious and the avoidant, to feel good are distinctly different. They're both doing the same thing. They're both trying to get their needs met, but in distinctly different ways. So the people pleasing partner, usually the anxious partner, is often stuck in their mind, right? So they're stuck in their head and they're focused on their partner. Do they like what I'm doing? Does this feel good? Do I look okay? All of this stuff, right? So they're not necessarily enjoying the moment. Whereas we do see that avoidance can actually be very much present in the moment. In fact, many people will say that avoidance can be highly performative, right? When it comes to sex, they can actually, because they're able to detach themselves emotionally, they can become very performative during sex. I've heard people say that, having sex with someone who is avoidingly attached was one of their best sexual experiences.
Comes with a lot of baggage, though.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not talking about what happens afterwards, but I'm talking about
I
like
get
in
it.
the moment, right? It can feel really intense, really present, like they're really with you. They're just, maybe, in the moment you feel like you're being devoured in a way that you've never felt before. That will change. The minute it's over, it's over. But I'm just talking about in that moment. So, they're focused. The anxious person is very much focused on the needs of their partner. So pleasing them. Oftentimes, if you ask them what it is that you like or what it is that you need, they don't even have an answer. They've never really thought about it. They don't really know. Whereas the avoidant person will generally focus more on themselves. So it's not necessarily that they're selfish, but the mindset from childhood was it's me, myself, and I, right? I have to take care of myself. So they do prioritize their own comfort and their own boundaries. Now, avoidants are very good with boundaries, which is something that anxious attachers are not good with.
Mhm.
Avoidants will say something like, yeah, I'd love to have you come over, but I need you to leave by 10 o'clock because I need to get my sleep. And no, you can't sleep over. And they're clear and they will uphold their boundaries.
The reason I'm making these faces, if anybody's watching us on YouTube, is because, Bev, when you give these examples, I just think of people in the past that I dated, and I'm like, oh man, that is like that guy, and that's that other guy. And I just wish I would have met you like 10 years ago. I would have saved me some trouble.
Yeah. I've had people say that to me before. It's like, this is very revealing, right? Because once
Yes.
you know the behaviors, then, it can really help save, I guess, a little bit of heartbreak. Now, the other reason too is that they're trying to protect their space, right? They don't want vulnerability. They don't want pillow talk. They don't want the emotional stuff. So you're generally not going to get an invitation to stay over the night. That's not what they want. They want the physical act and they want you to leave, but they'll tell you in advance. Because they also avoidant people don't like conflict. So they don't want to, they'll tell you, yes, you can come over, but you need to leave by 10. Is that okay? They'll get your approval before they engage.
Yes. That's
Mhm.
appreciated rather than like that, post sex, don't even get the aftercare. And it's like, okay, I got to go now. Bye.
So the idea of aftercare is not on their radar. Yeah, it's not on their radar. But again, it's not that they're mean or they're selfish or they're narcissistic or that they didn't get any care growing up either. They have no template.
Yeah, that's a
Or
really good point.
yeah, no one offered them care. They were neglected.
Yeah.
So it's like we're asking a fish to climb a tree. They've never. Well, it's true. They can learn. And the other thing about attachment styles, because I said at the beginning, it's learned behavior. So you can unlearn and relearn. But until such time that you do it, they simply don't have a template. They don't know how. And they certainly don't have the capacity to understand why that would be important to someone else. Oftentimes, we do see that someone who is anxiously attached will have a heightened libido. Okay. They often use sex as a way to secure closeness, as a way to get reassurance, as a way to repair or to soothe any sort of relational stress. So if you're arguing with your partner, oftentimes someone who's anxiously attached will go towards sex to get that emotional closeness that they need to soothe their own nervous system. So
Mhm.
they haven't really developed the skills for to self-soothe. They're very reliant on their partner for soothing. So they often will weaponize sex in this way. Okay, something to keep in
Mhm.
mind. Whereas someone who's avoidantly attached, if they're feeling that there's relational stress, they'll cut off sex.
Which I would imagine would make the anxious person more anxious.
Chase even more.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can see these two handle things in completely opposite ways. And as luck would have it, they do often date each other.
Yes.
It's not luck. It really has to do with the fact that they're so complementary, right? Like they're attracted to their opposite traits, right? So and then there's that familiarity of chaos too, right? So
Mhm.
someone who's really anxiously attached, for example, might find dating someone who's securely attached, might find that something's a little off. Where's the drama? Where's the pull? Where's the intensity? They might start fights, show some protest behaviors, try to get a rise out of you because they're used to that sort of, I would say, volatility with their emotions.
Yes. Yes. I've seen that before too in my coaching practice as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So a few other things about the anxious attacher, they are the most sexually compliant of out of all the four groups. So what do I mean by
Mm.
sexually compliant? Like we said earlier, they will do anything to earn the love or to stave off that fear of I will be abandoned, right? Do not leave me. So what we often see happen in these situations is a partner will say, I have this type of fantasy. This is what I want to do. And the anxious avoidant will go, okay. Although they really don't want to, they haven't learned how to say no. They end up doing things that engaging in unwanted and often risky sexual behavior, right? So you could be in a moment with someone and there's no condom available, and the anxious person is the anxious attacher is the most likely of all the attachment styles to say, it's okay, don't worry about it. Whereas a secure person would turn around and say, no condom, looks like it's going to have to be another night. And some people are really, really scarred from their childhood around this idea of abandonment. There's other core wounds there. I will be disliked. I will be excluded. I will be alone. I am bad. All of these sort of
Mhm.
core wounds that end up framing your thoughts, your emotions, and your behaviors, right? So if I don't do what they want me to do in this moment, I will be disliked and then shunned from the peer group, maybe.
Yes. Which is like literally the worst feeling when you're already anxious and feeling like you just want to belong and get loved.
Right. And so we always say those that start off as parent pleasers end up
Mhm.
as people pleasers.
Wow. I think we should put that on a t-shirt.
Yeah. Yes. So that's where that compliance comes in. Now, avoidance again, if we go back to their sort of their modus operandi, it's me, myself, and I'm hyper independent. They actually might rely much more on solo masturbation, on pornography, even if they're in a coupleship. They might
Mhm.
prefer that over partnered sex because for them, it's easier if they're just doing, if it's just about the physicality and the release. This is faster, simpler. I don't have to worry about, meeting someone else's needs and so forth. We do see this pattern often as well.
Yeah. It eliminates the pressure to perform, right? doesn't matter what goes on. You just take care of yourself and you keep it moving.
It's yes, but it's also it eliminates any possibility for intimacy or expectations of closeness or what you might want me to do afterwards.
Yeah.
Like that crazy aftercare thing that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I did want to just interject for our listeners. If you don't know the term aftercare, I only learned it myself a couple of years ago. It's basically after sex, it's that connection moment. So that could be like head rubs or hugging or talking, but just some type of connection where it's not just sex is over and then you go on to the next thing.
Yeah, I agree. It's a moment just to sort of settle into, and the body is still very heightened, right? It's a moment to just sort of settle in and, maybe there's some emotions coming up.
Yes. Yes. So I had some rapid fire questions I would love to ask you if you're down for it.
Sure, I'll do my best.
What is the one thing that destroys intimacy fastest?
In my opinion, it's dishonesty. So I think that a lot of this work, when I'm working with people, especially who are more on the anxious side, is, and especially when you come into midlife, it's embracing your authenticity. So someone who's been anxious and people pleasing their whole life, they do hit a point generally in their early to mid 40s where they're like, I've had enough, right?
Mhm.
And they start thinking about what it is that I need to feel satiated, happy, joy. What do I need in my partnerships in my life? And of course, this has to do with, fluctuating hormones and life situations and all sorts of things. So that authenticity, I think, becomes really, really important. And the minute you stray from that and you're dishonest with yourself and you're dishonest with your partner, there is no intimacy.
Yes. Ugh. Yeah, that's literally, to me, that's like the worst, the dishonesty. Because it removes all the authenticity. It's just, and if you're someone who's intuitive, you're going to pick up on that as well. And that's going to
Oh, yeah.
dysregulate you and make you more anxious or avoidant, whichever. So, my final question for you today, Bev, is what relationship truth do people usually not want to hear, but they need to hear it?
I often hear people standing and taking a stance of victimhood. I don't love this, right? Where it's
Mhm.
like, "Ah, I always pick the wrong partners, right? Like that. And to me, that's just a bit silly because I think that is coming mostly from people who have not done the work to understand
Mhm.
that they are likely insecurely attached and that they have to do their own work to heal that. Once they become more securely attached, and it's a journey like anything else, they will then start to find other securely attached people more attractive, more appropriate partners. The reason you keep choosing the same thing over and over and over is because you continue to move towards what's familiar
Mhm.
without breaking the cycle. So it's not the universe that just keeps sending you bad partner after bad partner, right? I mean, I hear people talk about everyone I date is a narcissist. First of all, I think people overuse the term narcissism. If you want to change your dating outcomes and attract a better partner, you yourself have to first become a better partner.
Mic drop moment. Yes. Yeah. If listeners, if you take nothing else away, yes, that part. We only can control ourselves, our behaviors. We can't make anybody do anything that they don't want to do. And if you keep finding yourself falling into the same patterns, it might be worth looking at yourself and seeing where there might be some zhuzhing or some glow up that we can do to avoid these things in the future.
Well, usually this has to do with boundaries. An
Mm-hmm.
abuser, a narcissist, someone who's unkind, who doesn't have a lot of integrity. They can only come into your life as you allow them to. So
Mm-hmm.
the minute that you notice that someone is not of good character, that's it. Cut it off. I have this thing with my group of friends, and we always say, you know what? That behavior is unacceptable. Access denied. That doesn't work for me. And so access denied. And when you uphold your own boundaries and your own standards, which everyone in the dating world talks about, but it really is true, right? The narcissist didn't just land in your lap. You allowed them in. Right now, people often will say to me, but I didn't see the signs in the beginning and they changed and they this and that. Yes, I know that that's often the case because they're very manipulative, but usually people will stay far beyond when they do see the first signs.
Yeah, it's like that sunken cost fallacy.
Right.
Yeah, which again, listeners, if you're like, what is that? That's where you're like, well, I've already, spent 2 years in this relationship and I probably won't find anyone better. So even though they're not a great partner, I'm just gonna like stick it out and hope it works out.
So that is the mindset of someone who's anxiously attached right there.
Mhm.
So I probably won't find anyone better.
Yeah.
That is a core belief tied to the core wound of I am bad, right? So or I'm unworthy. So I might as well just take whatever is given to me because nothing better is going to come my way. So they're conditioned from a very young age to accept breadcrumbs because they were breadcrumbed by their parents.
Yeah.
When I talk about their love that was unpredictable, their parents sometimes gave them love and they knew that felt good, but then they would pull it away. So they would get snippets, right? And so that's what that person knows to be love. So they're conditioned that this is what love is, right? So just even in the language, we picked up right away when you can hear when people speak, well, I might as well stay. I won't get anything better. So when we talk about attachment styles impact not just your romantic relationships, but first and foremost, the relationship to yourself.
Yes. Number
Right?
one.
Number one, that's a prime example of something that we see. Those beliefs that we hold on to that for the most part are categorically untrue, but we believe them to be true.
Bev, this has been such a great conversation, and I could probably sit here and talk for many more hours with you. So we will have to figure out another time for you to come back and talk more about this topic. But before we wrap it up today, where can our listeners find you?
So we do have a website, securelyloved.com. We are on Instagram at securely_. I also have a YouTube channel where I try to put out a lot of videos about this topic. That's also Securely Loved. And I just launched a TikTok. So I know I'm like a few years behind, but I just launched a TikTok, also Securely Loved. So I'm sort of everywhere. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you. There's also on my website a free quiz that you can take that you answer a couple questions and it'll give you a sense of where you fall in terms of your own attachment style, which for a lot of people is usually like a good starting place.
That's amazing. I will be sure to have all of Bev's information in the show notes. Listeners, you can go check her out, follow her everywhere. And Bev, thank you again so much for your time, your energy, and your expertise on attachment styles. I know that our listeners are really going to get a lot out of this.
Thank you.
This conversation was such a powerful reminder that intimacy is never just physical. Our nervous system, our childhood experiences, hormones, stress levels, self-worth, emotional safety, and communication patterns all come into the bedroom with us. And I think understanding attachment helps people stop seeing themselves as broken and start understanding themselves with more compassion.
And that's a wrap on this episode of Sip with Summers, where we laughed, learned, and probably said clitoris more times than your high school health teacher ever did. If you liked what you heard, be a gem and leave a review, share it with your favorite group chat, or send it to that friend who really needs to hear this. You know the one. For more tips, tools, and slightly inappropriate jokes, follow me on social or head to summersoflove.com. Until next time, stay curious, stay turned on, and as always, keep sipping.